I'm Jack Bradley, filling in for Steve Lance tonight. A federal judge has just ordered the release of pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil from immigration detention. The Trump administration has sought to deport him over his role in protests at Columbia University. District Judge Michael Farbiarz announced the decision after a request from Khalil's lawyers to free him on bail. Khalil served as a negotiator and a spokesperson for the demonstrators protesting on campus. He was detained on March 8th at his apartment building in Manhattan, and he's been held in a Louisiana detention center since. While Khalil isn't accused of breaking the law, the Trump administration argues that his activities during the Columbia protests were anti-Semitic and undermined U.S. foreign policy. Khalil's lawyers argue that the activist was arrested for political speech protected by the First Amendment. And the latest on the Trump administration as it imposes new sanctions on Iran. Meanwhile, a court upholds Trump's use of the California National Guard to respond to riots in Los Angeles. NTD's David Zhang has more from the White House.
Mr. President, the Iranian foreign minister this afternoon said if the U.S. is serious about negotiations, that you would call up Israel and request that they stop their airstrikes. Will you make that request?
Well, I think it's very hard to make that request right now. If somebody's winning, it's a little bit harder to do than if somebody's losing. But we're ready, willing, and able, and we've been speaking to Iran, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
The Trump administration imposes new sanctions today on Iran aimed at the regime's weapons programs. The sanctions target several individuals and entities, some based in Hong Kong and the UAE. They're accused of supporting Iran's ballistic missile and drone programs. This comes as President Trump today again met with his team in the Situation Room at the White House.
Just a time to see whether or not people come to their senses.
Trump says he will decide within 2 weeks on whether to launch a military strike on Iran. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance is in Los Angeles meeting with the Marines and federal officers. The area has become the focal point of the recent anti-ICE protests. His visit is the latest in a series of moves the Trump administration is taking to crack down on illegal immigration.
When they go out, let's say you have a Border Patrol official who needs to go out and arrest somebody, maybe a violent criminal who's also an illegal alien. When that Border Patrol agent goes out to do their job, they said within 15 minutes of them trying to do their job, they have protesters, sometimes violent protesters, who are in their face, obstructing them, preventing them from doing their job, and endangering their lives. Why do they have that? Because those people have been egged on by local officials.
Starting about 2 weeks ago, protesters took to the streets in Los Angeles, with some turning violent. The protests died down after President Trump deployed the Marines and the California National Guard to respond to the riots in L.A. Now, the appeals court today ruled that President Trump lawfully deployed the troops, a major win for the Trump administration. That's after California Attorney General Rob Bonta sued the Trump administration, alleging that Trump first needed the California governor's approval before dispatching troops. Reporting from the White House, David Zhang, NTD News.
A high court win for energy companies. A majority of Supreme Court justices today are allowing fuel producers to proceed with their lawsuit against a federal agency. NTD's Arlene Richards brings us more on that, as well as a win for victims of terrorism abroad.
Fuel producers can challenge California's emissions regulations. The Supreme Court on Friday said they are not barred from advancing a lawsuit against the EPA. The EPA approved California regulations that require automakers to manufacture more electric vehicles and fewer gas-powered cars. In a 7-2 decision, the majority overturned an appellate court's dismissal of the case. In the case below, the EPA didn't challenge the company's standing under Article 3 of the Constitution. However, California and several other states with similar regulations intervened to defend the EPA's approval. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, writing the majority opinion, acknowledged that the regulations are not directly imposed on the fuel producers, but said they clearly will impact gasoline purchases and cause monetary injury. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented. Also on Friday, a tripled jury award of nearly $219 million will stand. The High Court unanimously upheld a federal law called Promoting Security and Justice for Victims of Terrorism. In 2019, the law amended the Federal Anti-Terrorism Act, which had created a right for American victims of terror attacks outside the U.S. to sue in U.S. courts. Under the amendment, the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority indirectly consent to being sued in the U.S. when they pay terrorists to kill or injure Americans. The Palestinian Authority operates a so-called Martyrs Fund that sends money to the families of Palestinians who were killed, imprisoned, or injured while committing acts of violence against Israel. The plaintiffs, family members of American victims killed or injured abroad, had successfully won a 7-week trial in 2022. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Now that an appeals court says President Trump acted lawfully in deploying the National Guard to L.A., will this change public perception? Joining us live to discuss is jury consultant and national trial attorney Madeline Somerville and Miami GOP committeewoman Angie Wong. Thank you both very much for joining us. Angie, let's start with you. Is this a significant win for President Trump? And do you think that it shifts public perception on the National Guard presence?
No, absolutely it is, because this is a federal versus states right. And clearly there is federal supremacy here. Whatever the president says, especially when it comes to national security in the times of emergency, should overrule anything that this do. So right now we have a clear decision stating that the president can bring in national troops in when the local municipality won't do it themselves and cannot contain the violence. And that's what this is about. So we have a clear order, and this is going to be very important because it signaled to all the other states that if you cannot control what's happening on the grounds, we're talking about the state governors and local leadership, then the president will step in.
Right. This could be a sign that this, could apply to other states. And Madeline, over to you. While the president didn't notify Governor Newsom before deployment, the court ruled that the governor had no power to veto it. What's your reaction to this, and does it set a precedent?
I think it certainly sets a precedent, but I did want to challenge what my colleague said just a moment ago about this being about the National Guard, the officials in Los Angeles not being able to control things. What the court actually said was that if there are people who are assaulting federal officers or causing damage to federal buildings, then there can be federal intervention, right? It wasn't because the state couldn't control it. It was, does the federal government have any authority over the situation at all, right? So it didn't have anything to do with that. And in fact, the Los Angeles police commissioner said that it was a completely separate thing, the protesters versus the National Guard coming in to help carry out what ICE's job was. So I think actually there's some sort of misunderstanding here between what between what the Ninth Circuit actually decided and what the messaging is that's coming out of the White House.
Mm-hmm. And so ICE agents are reportedly facing a 500% increase in assaults when arresting illegal immigrants as they carry out this massive push. In one case, a convicted child sex offender and illegal immigrant dragged an ICE agent 50 yards with his car while resisting arrest in Minnesota, a state where some officials have strong anti-ICE sentiments. Madeline, do you think that this type of rhetoric might embolden criminal illegal immigrants to act violently toward ICE officers?
I certainly hope not. I think that it's, regardless of where you are in politics, that kind of violence should never be tolerated. And I think it's incumbent upon Democrats to call attention to that and to say, yeah, we support the fact that people are protesting and exercising their First Amendment rights, but there's no need to claim violence that you don't support. So I think that it should be the job of the Democratic Party to come out and distinguish those things and to make sure that you're only standing up for things that you believe in.
Mm-hmm. And Angie, your response, and what do you think can be done to better protect agents enforcing the law?
Well, you have politicians who are acting like activists. You have the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, and the minority speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, using phrases like ICE agents, Nazis, and other things. They're inciting the violence. They're making it okay for activists on the ground to go after ICE agents, which is why you're seeing an upsurge in violence towards law enforcement. It's almost become fashionable. You had a mayoral candidate, Brad, in New York City, who recently got arrested for trying to stop an ICE arrest, and he made the news, trying to win a primary, which he didn't. And ultimately, they're doing this because they know it's fashionable amongst the Democratic base. Right now, Democrats are demonizing ICE agents and law enforcement, so much so that it's okay to attack them. That's what the message Democratic leaders are giving out right now. And that's got to stop.
So on this, the DHS says Congress members have the right to visit detention facilities for oversight, but it now requires them to give about 72 hours notice. Angie, critics argue that oversight is a core role in Congress. Why would ICE field officers have this provision in the first place?
Oversight is fine, but what you're seeing now are demands and activism happening within ICE detention centers. You're seeing a lot of videos being made. You're seeing arrests being made. That's not oversight, right? You're not going there to observe. You're going there to cause noise and cause violence and maybe, gain a little bit of publicity for yourself. That's what they're doing. So the 72-hour rule, that's fine. I think that is more than fine to make that request. And that would be probably the case for other agencies if you were to go in and observe what was going on. So I have no problem with that. I think that if they want oversight, that's great. But if you're going there to disrupt, well, let the ICE agents do their job and do not make it any harder, and definitely don't put them in danger.
And Madeline, I want to get your thoughts on this provision and also on the issue of these Democratic political figures being arrested.
Certainly. So I'd like to call attention to one of the statistics that was brought out. So with there being a 400% increase, what really happened was that the amount of assaults went from 8 to 48. So yes, there was a massive increase, but it's because it was in response directly to the uptick in the amount of arrests that ICE were initiating. And because of that, there's going to be more responses than usual, right? So one act of violence is too many. However, the messaging, again, that's being put out is inconsistent with what's actually going on. And I do think that it's incumbent upon lawmakers and political officials to say, hey, guys, you can protest, you can exercise your First Amendment right, but it is not okay to engage in violence that we wouldn't support as a party.
Okay, I want to go a little bit abroad now. The Supreme Court allows victims of terrorist attacks in different countries to sue in U.S. courts, even when defendants live entirely outside the U.S. jurisdiction. Madeline, what kind of impact could this have, and how could it help victims and their families?
So I'm actually really excited about this ruling. As somebody who studied international law in law school, I was always very frustrated at the lack of teeth in international law, because there's not a whole lot that can be done when you don't have jurisdiction. Because the U.S. courts have just allowed this under the purview of U.S. foreign policy, saying that people who terrorize U.S. citizens are violating a foreign policy and that we can therefore sue them. They've submitted themselves to jurisdiction in that way. We finally have some accountability there. So I'm actually very encouraged by this ruling because it allows us to be able to hold people accountable that deserve it.
And Angie, what types of cases do you think will emerge from this, and how would enforcement work if the accused reside in foreign countries?
Yeah, no, I was looking into this. Like Madeline, I'm very excited about this ruling. You're going to start seeing some October 7th cases coming around. I would imagine that's around the corner. That's what this case was built for. But remember, this is a civil case, right? This is not, it's not criminal. So what we're looking at is really those groups that have, those foreign groups who maintain a U.S. bank account, for example, or U.S. holdings, right? Because ultimately these are about damages as well as a symbolic win, because it's not a criminal case. So those who are held legally accountable, this is mainly symbolic, unfortunately. But I do think that we're going to see lots of cases opening up beyond just suing those that are involved with the PLO. This could branch out to other terrorist groups outside of just being part of the Palestinian groups. And I think law opens the door for that. Now, this is just additional assurance and protection for Americans abroad, so I'm very happy to see this.
Well, we covered a lot here. Angie Wong and Madeline Somerville, thank you both very much for your insights today. Really appreciate it. And now a federal judge has indefinitely blocked President Trump's efforts to prevent international students from coming to Harvard University. After the ruling was announced, Trump posted on social media that the administration's working with Harvard to address their, quote, large-scale improprieties. He also wrote a possible deal may be announced soon. International students make up roughly a quarter of the students' body at that school.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.